Colin, to talk a little bit about Corvidae, the second piece on the program, which you choreographed, there are lots of bird dances in the repertoire. Cunningham's Beach Birds and Swan Lake, Dying Swan. What made you decide bird dance, and why these birds?
The job I had before this job, I was on faculty at a place called California Institute of the Arts. And when I first got there, they had a lot of crows. And they seemed to know what the energy was in the school. So by checking out the crows, you could know whether the day was going to be a nice, calm day, or whether people were completely out of their mind and neurotic, and you really were going to have to be very careful. And I'm not really sure whether I was correct, but that's the way I always felt. There were times where they were just very calm, and there were times where they were just kind of twitchy. And it seemed to align with what was going on in the building. I don't know, any of you, if you've worked in education, the temperature can change.
So did you know that was going to be, so then when did you realize, like, oh, I've been studying this movement and the way that the sort of attitude of them, when did you decide, oh, this is the dance I'm making?
Somebody said, well, crows, they know what's going on. And I got some books on mythology, and you realize that almost every culture, crows, ravens, they're just, they're really treated as messengers. They're treated as the people, as the creatures that know things. Thor had mind and memory, one on each shoulder. There was an army in Wales where the army was losing, but the crows went out and pecked the eyes out of all the other. And and I also studied a little bit of what they're people who are working with them right now, and they've trained them to use vending machines. So they'll pick up quarters on the ground, put them in the vending machine so they get food. And one of the things I love about them the most is that they hold grudges. So they tagged them, University of Washington, they tagged them, and they wanted to be, they didn't want the crows to know who they were, so they all wore Richard Nixon masks. And to this day at the University of Washington, if you wear a Richard Nixon mask, the crows will dive bomb you. And there's something I love about them knowing stuff about us that we don't know. And I feel that is actually the role of the artist as well. So it's very interesting to me to have people on stage who you feel are noticing things in that way.
So I want to now switch to thinking about your role as artistic director and the way that you have staged Chaconne for us here with this opening footage of José Limón himself performing it, and then seeing three dancers in succession taking over the solo. And I was thinking about the way in which we know how Limón did it because of this footage from 1948. And then there's also how the dance is done in the 21st century. So maybe both of you could talk a little bit about, like, where's the room for individuality and where's the room for, you have to stick with what Limón himself was doing?
I think it's an interesting question, and it's one that we kind of grapple with a lot in doing this work that is older, and we are different people now than, different dancers now than there were in 1948 or whatever. So something that I have heard from many, many dancers that worked directly with Jose was that every time someone new took on a role, he would change just a little bit here or there so that it really, to them, felt like it was their own, which to me gives us license to also make it our own. I think that is in the spirit of what he was after. He wanted to see the individual expressing the idea. So if you need to bend your head this way instead of that way to make it work for you, but the idea is still the same, I think to me that's what we're really after. And so, not that we don't go back to the films and watch how Jose did it, and sort of, I've been recently studying that film that you saw a lot, and going back and saying, wow, like his use of weight in this is what I really see. So how can we bring that back into what we're doing? Even if it's slightly different.
So I was reading an interview that you did with Dance Teacher magazine, and you were talking about your early training, how you never used a mirror, that you were using chairs just like this as a ballet bar, and so that you learned something from sort of the inside rather than studying images. So how do you bring that into the conversation with the dancers?
Well, I think a lot of this work has to do with, like I said, carrying forth the idea, aiming for something, and then dealing with the consequences of that aim. And the way that we all know how to resist gravity, we all know how to fall, but the way that we all deal with that force is slightly different. So I think to me it's about, yes, let's look at the form, but let's also look at what does that feel like, the way he like really slices his arm through there, and then what does that feel like in your body? So to me that's that same kind of internal visceral feeling about the movement, instead of saying, let's make sure that the elbow gets to this angle, and that, so that we can really come from it from an internal place.
I want to talk about Morris Pavane because, somebody said to me right at intermission that she feels like seeing that dance is like going to church because it's such a sacred piece for her, and she's seen it so many times over the years with lots of different dance companies in the world doing it, a lot of ballet companies taking it on. So I guess I want to first just ask about the kind of, that's not a 21st century kind of understanding of how we posture and interact. And if you could just say something about how you help the dancers as artistic director approach a work that maybe they studied in dance history, maybe they've seen some other company do, how you get them to relate to it from their perspective now.
I think what Logan is talking about, this idea of going back how much you can, I try to give the dancers as much as they can take from the past, so they can watch all the videos they want. I actually expect them to be curious, creative artists. We would never go, how do you get an actor to be Iago? Like, that's the actor's job. And I think in some way that's, to me, the dancer's job, is to have the curiosity to think how I can make it work. And at the same time, we brought Clay Taliaferro, who did the Moor, back for 2 weeks, who worked with them and really, really honed it from that point of view. But for me, it's very, very much about not really even giving the dancers permission to be creative with it, while still having the clarity of actually what the movement itself is. But it's actually, that is what it is to watch for performers who can make a dramatic world that we can believe in. I was actually I was having a great time. Jesse did some things he's never done before tonight, and that's always the case. They're always doing things that they've never done before, and then they have to respond to each other very much in the same way that actors do.
Well, I'm so glad you're talking about this, because I'm still actually a little mad at you, Amelia. Because
I know, sorry.
So can you talk about, that it's a very, you have this, it's a spare narrative, but it's really clear, and the consequences of your actions have a dramatic effect. Can you talk about what it's like to sort of get into the role, and maybe what it feels like as a woman in the 21st century to be sort of directed by her partner, and then the relationship with the other woman?
One thing for me that in both roles that I did was work, there's a lot of these kind of waiting periods that happen. And a lot of the arc, a lot of change in your character happens while you're waiting. So for me, it was about really going from beginning to end and understanding my arc. So as Amelia, what is my desire? Well, really, it's to get my husband to pay attention to me. So I'll do anything because I just want to get his attention, and I'm jealous that Desdemona gets this beautiful gift. And and that's my personal narrative, right? And different dancers approach it in different ways. But to me, that was the most helpful thing, was to go, I would sit on the train and just listen to the music from beginning to end and live my arc in my head. So that then when I'm there in the studio working or on stage, I know my steps, but I also know my arc. And that gives me freedom to then actually react in the moment, right? You have some idea of where you're going, so you know it so well that then you can forget it.
And that's what you're talking about the live reaction that happens in a performance that's different every night.
And you know, really that live reaction is kind of according to very different rules in each piece. You know, I feel, for instance, when you're watching Pavane, you are reacting as Emilia. She's not reacting as Logan. In Nightlight, you're really reacting, but you're reacting on a purely physical way that has that emotional charge. So you're really, this idea of being that present and that responsive, but really in different ways depending on the kind of work you're doing.
That's a great transition for me to ask you about we see such a kind of formal sense of partnering in Morris Pavane, and then we go to a very much more contemporary sensibility about partnering in Kate Weare's piece. Could you say something about your decision to put them in that order, and how what you were thinking about in serving the older than the newer?
Kate Weare's piece, to me, is a magnificent counterpoint to a piece like the Morris Pavane. In the Morris Pavane, the men have all the power. The women are responsive at all times, especially in public sort of way of working. We don't live in that world anymore. And what I love about Kate Weare's work is that it's just every individual is responding to every individual, and it's in the moment. I love the fact that the women are beating up on the men are beating up on the women are being tender with the men are being tender with the women, they're being tender with each other. That it really, to me, shows that we're not doing the Morris Pavane because it's all we can do. We're doing the Morris Pavane because we feel it's a timeless, great piece, and that you're not looking at us saying, oh, you believe that this is the way men should be, this is the way women should be. It's a vehicle for this incredibly beautiful and tragic story.
Logan, do you want to say something about what it's like for you as a performer? I mean, you have intermission to sort of completely change bodily attitude, costumes, etc. What it's like, to, maybe a little bit not just in the physicality, but some of your sort of preparation to go on and be a much more 21st century person.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think interestingly in the Morris Pavane and in Nightlight, one of the things that is very similar are these moments and the change of space between something feeling public and something feeling private. So that's, to me, like a nice way to thread it together. There are all these moments in Pavane where you're secluded and private, and then there are your very present regal moments. And I think it's quite similar, actually. You know, there are moments when you're standing there, but you're not really engaging, and then there are moments that you're standing there really engaging. So that's a thread, I think, that we can find. I actually think the more difficult transition is from Nightlight into Choreographic Offering, which is like just really day and night feeling. And that, to me, is like a little bit more of a, okay, finish that one. Wake it up, let's go to the next one. You know, so that to me is actually the more difficult transition. And luckily, I've got the beginning of choreo with David and the men dancing to hear that music. And for me, music is a huge way in just that sensory experience. I'm like, oh, right, this is the world I'm in now. And then that can sort of come out physically.